So you're going to get a 1-hour lecture in 20 minutes. So it's going to be a little bit like MTV, and you're going to get a lot of dopamine. At the end of this, I'm going to recommend you take more oxytocin than dopamine, but for reasons you'll see. There's the abstract thesis. That's in your bulletin. To perceive how media effects actually impact the human species, it helps to decontextualize ourselves and see how it affects another species. So we'll start there.
What bird has the most elaborate, the most complex, and the most beautiful song in the world? Well, I guess there are lots of contenders, but this bird must be one of them. The superb lyrebird of Southern Australia.
He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage. And he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. It's a very convincing impersonation. Even the original is fooled. He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
There's nothing wrong with the bird's brain. He's just making the same assumption you and I are making. It's just a new technology, and as long as I assume it's another bird, everything will be fine. Which brings us to the point that adaptation without awareness is suicide. By that I mean adaptation to the new technology without awareness of its unintended consequences, its effects, is suicide. Cultural, institutional, personal, political. Throughout human history, there have been 5 great ages of change. These are the 5 stages of communication media: oral, writing, print, electronic, and digital. Dr. Barnett began us with the electronic culture, and Kierkegaard wrote the concept of dread just before the medium of the telegraph wrapped up the medium of print and put it to bed. And we're now putting to bed the electronic culture and entering the digital age. The technology affects everything. If there are 3 great forces in the world, they are the church, love, the state, fear, and the market, greed. So look, for instance, quickly at how media forms shape the state in forms of military conflicts. Orality produces tribal war, writing a land war, printing a naval war, electronic and air war, digital and information war, which is why you and I are suspect when we go through to get on our airplane, and why we do this at TSA and make them check to make sure we didn't put a bomb in our underwear. Media forms also shape monetary practice. Orality produces barter, writing produces commodity money, printing produces representative money, electronic produces fiat currency, digital produces digital currency. And of course, it shapes religious practice. Orality produced polytheism, then writing produced monotheism, printing produced the schism in the West, Then electronic culture produced what Charles Taylor called a sustainable, culturally sustainable agnosticism or atheism. And digital culture produces postmodernism, which is just another way of saying that what's true in theology is true in fashion. Nothing's in fashion right now because everything's in fashion right now. It doesn't matter what you wear or believe as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. As media change creates symbolic change, so too does symbolic change create new psychological and emotional stresses for the individual and culture. Now in 1949, one of the best definitions of mental disorder came out. Back then it was called neurosis. Legman said, "We define neurosis as the defensive activities of normal individuals against abnormal environments." This definition, by the way, is exactly the same one that the U.S. Veterans Department of Veterans Affairs uses for PTSD. There's nothing wrong with you, just as there's nothing wrong with the bird. But you've adapted yourself to an abnormalized environment, and you're having a weird reaction. So when you look at the growth of media in the United States from Kierkegaard's moment to now, 1840, you see the four great telas. Tele is just the Greek word for distance, distant writing, telegraph, distant speech, telephone, distant vision, television. Can anybody name the patron saint of the television? St. Clair, very good. And what I call the internet, telefusion, distant togetherness. So here we are in 2018, and this chart is weirdly correlated to another chart. Here's the growth of mental disorders in the same time period. And correlation does not equal causality, be clear. But correlation is the ground on which you find the figure of causality in almost every case. So when the telephone becomes a mass medium, there's 7 mental disorders. By the time the radio is a mass medium, there's about 22. By the time television is a mass medium, 106. When I'm a kid, there's 182. And now the new DSM-5, there's over 350 to choose from, some of which are specific to a specific technology, such as texting addiction. Whether you are in psychiatry or psychology or not, we all know just from our sort of observation of the last 10 years, especially since 2007 when the smartphone was introduced, that there's a massive cultural change that's happened. Here are some examples. That's what it used to look like. That's what it now looks like. That's what it used to look like. Here's what it now looks like. That's what it used to look like. There's what it now looks like. There's what it used to look like. Here's what it now looks like. That's what it used to look like. You get the picture. This is my favorite one. This person's on television, and they're missing out on the moment. By the way, if you're bored by this lecture, that's okay, because you can now tune out. Here's your tax dollars at work, then, now, and as faithful Catholics, you probably all saw this one. So in a previous work and in a book that's coming out next year, I have written on the 7 vices of the virtual life. These are desensitization, ignorance, narcissism, impatience, addiction, goallessness, and disembodiment. And these are 7 new vices. They're not renames of the old classic traditional 7 vices, though there are some, again, interesting correlations. But after banging my head against this wall for about 10 years, I realized something that hadn't occurred to me, and that was this neurochemical insight. And that was this. People are not actually addicted to their smartphones. What they're addicted to is the neurochemical rewards provided by their smartphones. And so to understand what's going on, we have to get inside the bird's brain. We have to get inside what's happening to the human at the neurochemical level with this new technology. So the acronym is CODES, though that's just a cute acronym. It's CODES for these 5 chemicals. It's cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin. That's not the order I wish it was in, but because that's the acronym, that's the order I'll go in. Cortisol is your stress monger chemical. It's what your brain releases when you're stressed out. You all right now have higher levels of cortisol than anybody in previous human history. Stress levels and cortisol levels are highest in technological societies. And the causes of these are you have no time, you're super busy, which is why you're multitasking right now. You have information overload, you have sleep deprivation. The Industrial Revolution took away an hour of sleep. The television took away an hour of sleep. Mother going to work in the 70s took away half an hour of sleep. And the internet and smartphone has now taken away another half an hour. So the average citizen used to get 10 hours of sleep, now gets about 6.5 hours of sleep. The other problem is, of course, you get less sleep when you have electricity in your culture and the lights stay on and you have artificial extension of the daytime. So the circadian rhythm is all messed up and you're more stressed than ever. Oxytocin, so cortisol is what you don't want. You want this to go down. You want less of this. Oxytocin, this is the good stuff. This is what they call human superglue. And this is what I describe it to my students as joy versus happiness. You want oxytocin more than you want dopamine. This is the child and mother bonding at birth, that despite the incredible pain of childbirth, the actual bonding that happens is this massive release of oxytocin between both mother and baby. Why I had you high five, fist bump, or whatever at the beginning, hug, is because hugging and intimacy releases oxytocin. Handshakes release oxytocin. And if you did hug or high five somebody at the beginning of the talk, that's one of 25 physical touches you'll get today. Your smartphone will get 2,500 touches today. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, how I wish I was a smartphone. Right? In other words, would that we would treat each other that lovingly. But we don't. So acts of charity, generosity, altruism, all of these things benefit, including, in other words, when you perform an act of charity or generosity or altruism, you benefit with oxytocin, the receiver benefits, and people who witness it benefit. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon. Oxytocin also inhibits addiction, especially addiction to dopamine. So when we talk about our children with like low impulse control, what we mean is they're addicted to dopamine because they haven't figured out how to derive oxytocin. Whereas we talk about he's a mature and sober-minded adult and he's in control of his passions, we mean he knows how or she knows how to get more oxytocin than the thrill, the cheap thrill, as you will, if you will, of dopamine. Dopamine is, of course, a selfish chemical. It can be achieved alone. It can also be achieved in groups, but it's necessary to physical activity, which is why in Parkinson's patients, when they kind of freeze up, they have some of the lowest levels of dopamine. It feels like an achievement, reaching a goal, activating a sense of agency, checking something off a to-do list. You can actually have a to-do list and be going through it, and as you walk by a store, you realize, oh, you need to go in there and get something. You can come out of the store, write it down on your to-do list, and then check it off right then, and you'll feel great, and you'll get more dopamine. It's a trick you can trick yourself into. But it's also released with smoking, with drinking, with gambling, with pornography, with video gaming, and the better you do in the game, the better your dopamine release, with texting, and with Facebook and pretty much all social media. This is probably the #1 driver of why the smartphone is so addictive. It's just come out in the last year or two. If you've been paying attention to it, you saw Sean Parker and another CEO, former higher echelon VP of Facebook admit what they had done. And what they had done was they had, in Sean Parker's words, we had exploited this vulnerability in human psychology, which was we had figured out that people love dopamine, and what we're going to do is we're going to have you post, and then you're going to get all these likes from your post, but we're not going to give them to you right away, because what we're going to do is we're going to hoard them, and so as to manufacture and increase time on site, the sacred TOS, we're going to give them to you in little drip feeds over the day and throughout the hours of the day, so that you have to keep coming back and checking your Facebook, which is why the average Facebook user's window is open 6 hours a day. What you're coming back for isn't Facebook. You're coming back to get that feeling of, oh, that dopamine release of the like. And so, as one VP put it, we've basically torn apart the fabric of society by doing this. And he says he now feels a tremendous amount of guilt. And it can also be achieved together: gameplay, sexual intimacy, drinking with friends, smoking in a group, etc. Right? But the problem is the alone versus together point that Sherry Turkle makes. Endorphins are also a selfish chemical. They can be achieved alone. You must be physically active to achieve them. And what they do is they mask physical pain. So when a comedian is really good and you laugh so much that it hurts, you're actually shaking up your internal organs, causing pain, but it's okay because you're releasing endorphins to cover that pain. or when you get the runner's high, if you're a runner, and you feel great while you're running, and then you go home and your muscles are incredibly sore and stiff for several hours. That's massive endorphin release. Sexual intimacy also release endorphins. Serotonin is the happiness chemical, feelings of status, pride, leadership. Maybe you got some of these when you were giving each other high fives and hugs. But these also have to do with conditions of attendance for media. So less time outdoors means lower serotonin, less physical activity means lower serotonin, and less group activity means lower serotonin. So if you're home alone on a Friday night, and if you're home alone or just inside with yourself and nobody else, or they're there but it doesn't matter because you're on your device, which the average citizen is now 12 hours a day in America, then you're going to have naturally lower serotonin levels all the time. So it shouldn't come as a surprise why the most technological generation ever, millennials, are the most depressed. And it shouldn't come as a surprise why suicide is suppressed homicide in the young 7 years ago, just 4 years after the smartphone was introduced. So the problem is we've created a technology that can provide most of these chemical rewards achieved previously only in groups. And the groups once provided safety and boundaries, but are now deliverable to our brains while completely alone. With a smartphone, the user can do all of these things without anybody else. And in Japan, there's actually a word for this now, hikikomori, where you are a shut-in and you have to live your life online because your emotional sustenance is requiring it. So the only thing you can't do is drink and smoke, even though you can achieve these depressant results of drinking by video gaming for 8 hours or more at a time, which is a growing phenomenon and an increasingly common practice. While nicotine is a stimulant, and as I pointed out elsewhere in the cell phone is the new cigarette, the cell phone provides almost the same amount of the ground of cigarette smoking despite not delivering nicotine. So here's one example of thousands you could choose from of the problem in our physical and spiritual lives. Texting and driving kills your body. We now know it's about 23% of all accidents. In 2016, 40,200 people were killed. Of that, if 23% is an accurate estimate, then we can safely say about 9,246 people died because of the inability to wait the 10 minutes till you got there and the need to respond to the text that you got while in the car. The smartphone also kills church attendance. Among the shocking discoveries of the Pew Research Study on Religion and American Life from 2007-2015, they found out that the young, digitally connected generation were the highest on the list to quit attending. And their number one reason was not theological disagreement or loss of belief. It was boredom. It didn't have the right production values. So a loss of 1.26 million a year means 3,455 people per day leaving the church, okay? If these two are equivocal, and I understand this is a big if, but if we can equivocate these two, then the evidence suggests that digital technology is killing the souls of our young at 137 times the rate at which it's killing their bodies. So when we say it's killing you, we don't mean that metaphorically, we don't mean that analogically, we mean that you're actually dying. And it's up to you and your pastors and parishioners and priests to figure out which is worse, soul death or spiritual death, or physical death. And so the solution is the people of God have always demonstrated the Spirit of the Lord by resisting the spirit of the age. The dominant spirit of the age is always the technology of the age. And adherence to the Spirit of the Lord always involves a media changeover. Okay? Noah changed the medium of dry land for that of water. Abraham changed the medium of gods of rock and stone for an invisible God. Moses exchanged the medium of Egyptian hieroglyphics for communication for the abstract letters of the alphabet in Hebrew. And Christ exchanged the hardening of the categories produced by the written letter of the law, the 613 laws of the Old Testament and prophets, for the living word, the spoken law, where he says you can reduce all these to two: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On this hangs the law and Moses and all the prophets. This is a massively upsetting thing to the previous system, but he says, don't think I'm come to destroy the law, I'm come to fulfill it. So, as Jacques Ellul puts it, existence is resistance. The problem is you can't resist a medium that's 24/7, 365, that's always there. You can't just turn it off like you could in the television age. So if 3 of your 4 waking hours is mediated, and the programming is now your priest, parent, teacher, i.e. when you actually do the content analysis, and I've done it, the number of hours we spend with our priests, parents, and teachers is nothing compared to the 12 hours a day, the 34 gigabytes a day that we're receiving through media. So the solution is, I just did that, sorry. The church must offer a better, more winsome way to access these 4 chemicals. We have to have a displacement method, right? You can't just quit smoking. You've got to start taking up chewing gum. And the solution is it can't be nicotine gum, okay? It has to be something that's actually nutritionally valuable for you. So something that's more embodied, less disembodied, less compulsive, more compelling, less addictive, more sobering, less ignorant, more intelligent, less immediate, more impactful, less tone deaf, more sensitive, less narcissistic, more altruistic, that offers the user less communication, more connection, more oxytocin, less dopamine, more sustained joy, less cheap thrills. Here's your bad news. Here's the 2012 data of U.S. religious retention rates. Hindu, Jews, Muslims still lead Orthodox, Mormons, or Catholics, and then all the Protestants, and I'm Anglican if you're feeling bad about yourself. Look at my numbers, okay? And that's the 2015 data. But here's the truth. The truth about religious retention rates, it's actually the Amish. The Amish have the highest retention rate, between 85 and 95%. They always get left off this list for, I don't know, convenient reasons, I think. But what they offer their young is embodied hard work and community with a purpose. Their no technology rules are a yes to community life. They do not have measurable rates of depression, suicide, atheism, abortion, homosexuality, autism, body image issues, pornography addiction, etc. Those last 2 are the 2 top issues affecting college students on our campuses, male or female, countrywide. They're unlikely to get 7 types of cancer, and 9 out of 10 choose to stay after their year of wilding. I'm not saying you have to become Amish. I'm saying you should look to them as really good examples of resisting the spirit of the age as defined by the technology of the age. And they give us very good insights. So here's a few specific recommendations. And since I'm out of time, I'll just say, please don't make, in other words, it's really interesting. What the church needs to do is be the church. What would be helpful is if somebody would do a 4-chemical breakdown of what levels of serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins are released during the liturgical service. I think that would be fascinating and very insightful. But the church isn't doing anything wrong. It just needs to do certain things more aligned with what it's already doing. And in that regard, I would say the key specific insights of neurochemical research are helpful. So for instance, at our freshman orientation program, we now have all programs to be 5 days or more, because a study showed when you take kids out into the woods and remove their cell phones from them, it takes them 5 days to actually get comfortable making eye contact and actually enjoying the release of oxytocin and serotonin that they're getting from each other, rather than resenting the fact that you took my cell phone. So we now make all programs 5 days or more. So it's just a fine-tuning of what you already do that I think is helpful. Thank you so much.